The woman who spent years trying to ruin my life over a 30-minute delay didn't realize one simple thing. Time changes everything, but some people never grow up. I can still see her face, the perfect drill team sponsor, staring at me with pure disgust because I didn't fit her image of a star. She called me a nuisance. She told me I didn't belong. And finally, she kicked me off the team because my dad was late picking me up from a game. But years later, that same woman walked into my dad's auto shop. She saw a lowly mechanic in greasy overalls, someone she thought she could bully and manipulate into committing insurance fraud. She didn't know my dad had a long memory and a very high-definition security system. She wanted a perfect estimate. What she got was a felony charge. If you're new here, smash that subscribe button right now, because stories about bullies finally getting what's coming to them, they're the best. Trust me, you won't believe the illegal favor she tried to force my dad to do. Justice is a dish best served on camera. Before I tell you about the mean girl meeting that started this whole mess, do me a quick favor. Hit that subscribe button if you love seeing people who think they're better than you get put in their place. I post stories like this every week, and honestly, the ending of this one is pure gold. Let's get into it. The middle school multipurpose room was humid, smelling of old floor wax and the faint, sweet scent of strawberry lip gloss. I stood near the back, clutching a flyer for the drill team informational meeting. I was 14, a little bit awkward, and definitely not part of the inner circle. In the front row, a group of girls, the kind with perfectly straightened hair and matching designer backpacks, turned around as I walked in. They were the teacher favorites, the ones whose names were always followed by a Best Smile award in the student paper. "Wait, is she actually here for the team?" one of them whispered, loud enough for half the room to hear. A blonde girl named Courtney let out a sharp, jagged laugh. "I guess they're letting anyone try out this year. Maybe she thinks it's a costume party." My face burned. I looked down at my sneakers, which were clean but definitely not the brand name ones they were wearing. I felt like a different species. They didn't just look at me. They looked through me like I was a smudge on a window pane. You really don't belong here," another girl muttered as I passed by to find a seat. "You're not exactly the look we're going for." I could have left. I could have walked out of that room, gone home and cried in my pillow. But as the popular girls turned back to whisper and giggle, a cold, hard knot of determination formed in my stomach. I wasn't the most athletic. I wasn't the prettiest. But I was flexible, and I was stubborn. "Is this the meeting for the Rockettes-style dance team?" I asked the girl sitting next to me. She looked just as nervous as I was. "Yeah," she whispered back. "But the routines are supposed to be really hard. My sister said the kicks are brutal." "I don't care," I said, my voice finally steady. "I'm going to learn them." That night, I went home and cleared a space in our small living room. I pushed the coffee table against the wall and started stretching. My dad watched from the kitchen, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. "What are you doing, honey?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. "I'm joining the drill team, Dad," I said, gritting my teeth as I reached for my toes. "Even if they hate me for it." Louisiana in August doesn't just feel hot, it feels heavy. It's the kind of humidity that sticks to your skin like a wet blanket, making every breath feel like you're inhaling steam. Summer camp started at 7 a.m., but by 9 a.m., the asphalt of the parking lot was radiating heat that could melt the soles of your shoes. "Positions!" the sponsor barked. Her name was Mrs. Gable, and she stood in the shade of a massive oak tree, sipping ice water while we baked in the sun. We had to stand in formation, feet together, chin up, arms locked with the girl next to us. Most of the girls acted like my skin was made of literal poison. They would gingerly hook their elbows with mine, their faces twisted in disgust as if my sweat was somehow more offensive than theirs. "Don't move," Courtney hissed under her breath. "If you twitch, we all pay." I stood there, sweat stinging my eyes. I could feel the sun beginning to cook the skin on my upper arms. Within days, I had angry, fluid-filled blisters that rubbed against my uniform every time I moved. But the rules were simple. Any mistake, any wobble, and the music stopped. "Infraction!" Mrs. Gable screamed, pointing a bony finger at me. I saw that shoulder drop. Everyone, set of 25 high kicks. Now. We didn't do push-ups. We did kicks. The goal was to get your toe to eye level, snapping your leg up with enough force to make your hip flexors scream. 1, 2, 3. By the time we hit 15, my legs felt like lead weights. By 25, I was gasping for air, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Again!" Mrs. Gable yelled. "You look like a wet noodle. Get those legs up or we'll stay out here until dark." I looked over at the sideline. A girl named Sarah had pulled a hamstring and was sitting in the grass with an ice pack. Mrs. Gable was sitting right next to her, patting her hand. "It's okay, Sarah," I heard her say. "You're a real athlete. You play basketball. You deserve the rest." Then she looked up at me, her eyes narrowing. "Why are you slowing down? You haven't earned a seat." I bit my lip so hard I tasted copper. My arms were burning, my legs were shaking, and the heat was making the world tilt on its axis. But I didn't stop. I kicked until my vision blurred. Mrs. Gable wasn't just a teacher. She was a woman living out her failed dreams through a group of 14-year-olds. She had one daughter, Brittany, who was our head choreographer. To Mrs. Gable, Brittany was a literal goddess. At rehearsals, she would sit on the bleachers like a queen on a throne, watching her daughter lead the line. "Look at her posture," Mrs. Gable would sigh, loud enough for those of us struggling in the back to hear. "That's what a dancer looks like. Grace, elegance, not whatever that is." That was usually me. One afternoon, the heat in the gym was stifling. The air was thick and smelled like old gym mats and high-potency hairspray. I was struggling to keep my breath steady when Mrs. Gable's voice cut through the music like a saw blade. "You! Sucking that stomach!" she shrieked from across the floor. "You look like a sack of potatoes in that uniform. How do you expect to be in the front row with a midsection like that?" I froze, my face turning a deep, hot crimson. 30 other girls stopped and stared. Some of the popular girls snickered, whispering behind their hands. I wanted the floor to open up and swallow me whole. I was 14, I was healthy, but in her eyes, I was a blemish on her daughter's perfect masterpiece. "I'm trying, Mrs. Gable," I managed to say, my voice small. "Try harder," she snapped. "And for heaven's sake, smile. You look like you're at a funeral." Lunch wasn't any better. We were all sitting in a circle on the floor, trying to recover. Someone told a joke, and I let out a genuine laugh. I had a mouthful of a turkey sandwich, and the laugh turned into a sudden, messy cough. "Gross," Courtney muttered, moving her bag away from me. Mrs. Gable looked over, her lip curling in disgust. "Rude," she barked. "Have some decorum. You're supposed to be representatives of this school, not animals." She turned back to her daughter, her face instantly softening into a doting smile as she handed Brittany a chilled Gatorade. The message was loud and clear. There was a who's who in this room, and I was at the very bottom of the list. I went home that day and cried in the shower so my dad wouldn't hear me. I told myself I'd show them. I'd be so good they couldn't ignore me. I didn't realize that in Mrs. Gable's world, it didn't matter how well you danced. If she decided you were out, you were out. The stadium lights were blinding, humming with a low-frequency buzz that made the humid night air feel electric. It was the night of our very first performance. I was wearing my uniform, the one my dad had worked extra shifts at the shop to pay for. It was crisp, white, and felt like armor. Despite the blisters, despite the sack of potatoes comments, I had made it. I was in the line. We finished the halftime routine, my heart hammering against my ribs, the roar of the crowd drowning out the self-doubt that usually lived in my head. For 3 minutes, I wasn't the awkward girl. I was a dancer. After the performance, we were instructed to wait by the equipment shed to be picked up. Mrs. Gable stood there, her eyes darting around like a hawk. Suddenly, she lunged toward the girls' restroom. "I know what I smelled," she shrieked. A minute later, she marched back out, dragging a girl named Ashley by the arm. Ashley was a sophomore, one of the cool ones. She'd been caught in the stalls smoking cigarettes with a group of high school boys. The smell of tobacco was thick on her hair. "You've disgraced this team," Mrs. Gable barked. "Your punishment is you'll sit out the next game. 1 game. Do you understand?" Ashley just rolled her eyes and nodded, a slap on the wrist. One by one, the other girls were picked up. Shiny SUVs pulled into the gravel lot, and the popular girls piled in, laughing and waving. My dad wasn't there yet. I knew why. He owned his own car repair business, and he was the only one there. If a customer showed up at closing time with a broken radiator, he couldn't just lock the doors and leave them stranded, and he was working for the very uniform I was wearing. 30 minutes passed. The gravel lot went quiet. It was just me, Mrs. Gable, and the crickets. "Where is he?" she snapped, checking her gold watch. "I have a life, you know. My daughter has a private lesson in 20 minutes. "He's coming, Mrs. Gable. He just had to finish a job." "I don't care about his jobs," she spat. She looked at me, her eyes cold and final. This shows a lack of commitment, a lack of respect for my time and this team's standards. She stepped closer, the smell of her floral perfume clashing with the stadium's scent of popcorn and cut grass. "You know this means you're off the team," she said. My heart stopped. "What?" "But it's just 30 minutes. Ashley was smoking and she only gets—" "Ashley is an asset." Mrs. Gable cut me off. You're a liability. Don't bother coming to practice Monday." The headlights of my dad's old Ford truck cut through the darkness of the gravel lot, just as Mrs. Gable turned her back on me. The engine had that familiar, heavy rumble, a sound that usually made me feel safe, but right now, it felt like the tolling of a bell. I didn't even wait for him to stop. I yanked the heavy metal handle of the door and scrambled into the cab. The interior smelled like WD-40, old leather, and the honest sweat of a man who had been under a chassis all day. "Hey, honey, I'm so sorry," my dad started, his face tired but lit with a smile. "That last customer had a—" He stopped mid-sentence when he saw me. I wasn't just crying. I was falling apart. My breath was coming in short, jagged hitches, and my chest felt like it had been hollowed out with a hot spoon. "What happened?" His voice dropped, turning instantly protective. "Did you fall? Did you get hurt?" She kicked me off, Dad," I sobbed, the words tumbling out in a mess of tears and snot. "Mrs. Gable. She said because you were 30 minutes late, I wasn't committed. She said I'm off the team, forever." My dad didn't say anything for a long 3 seconds. I saw his jaw tighten, a muscle jumping in his cheek. He looked out the windshield at Mrs. Gable, who was walking toward her luxury sedan, swinging her keys like she hadn't just crushed a 14-year-old's world. "She said what?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. "She said I'm a liability," I choked out. "She let Ashley stay on for smoking in the bathroom. Gee, but I'm gone because of 30 minutes. My dad put the truck in park. He didn't turn off the engine. "Just a minute," he said, his tone as steady as a surgeon's. "I'll be right back." I watched through the blurry, tear-stained window as my dad climbed out of the truck. He was still in his work clothes, a dark navy jumpsuit stained with oil and grease. His knuckles barked from a slipped wrench. He looked like exactly what he was, a man who worked for a living. He intercepted her right as she reached her car door. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw the body language. Mrs. Gable tried to do her usual power trip move, crossing her arms and looking down her nose at him. She probably thought she could bully a mechanic the same way she bullied middle schoolers. She was wrong. My dad stepped into her space. He didn't touch her, but he grew about 10 feet tall in that moment. I saw him pointing back at the truck, his gestures sharp and emphatic. Mrs. Gable's eyes went wide, and for the first time in the history of the drill team, she looked small. She looked like a woman who had just realized she'd picked a fight with the wrong father. He ripped her a new one right there in the gravel. He told her about the shifts he worked, the blisters on my arms she'd ignored, and the sheer, petty ugliness of her standards. When he got back into the truck, he was breathing hard. He didn't look at me for a second. He just put the truck in gear and we pulled away. "We're going home," he said quietly. "And honey, you're worth a hell of a lot more than a spot on that woman's line." Years passed, and the humid nights of the Louisiana Stadium became a distant, bitter memory. Tutsi, I grew up. I finished school, moved on, and realized my dad was right. My worth wasn't tied to a uniform or the approval of a woman who peaked in high school. But in a small town, the past has a way of circling back when you least expect it. My dad's shop, Miller's Auto, had become a local staple. It was a place built on honesty and hard work, smelling of scorched metal, rubber tires, and heavy-duty degreaser. I was home for the summer, helping him out with the books in the front office, watching the parade of customers come and go. That's when I saw the silver Lexus pull into the lot. The driver's side door opened, and a woman stepped out. She was older now, her hair a stiffer, more artificial shade of blonde, but the posture was unmistakable. It was the queen on the throne stance. Mrs. Gable. She walked into the office, the click-clack of her high heels, sharp against the concrete floor. She looked around with a slight curl of her lip, as if the very presence of motor oil was a personal insult to her dignity. She didn't recognize me. To her, I had just been a sack of potatoes she'd discarded a decade ago. "Is the owner in?" she barked, not even bothering to say hello. "I have an insurance claim. I was told this was the place, though I must say, it's a bit rustic." I felt that old knot form in my stomach, but this time it wasn't fear. It was a cold, buzzing curiosity. "He's in the back," I said, my voice perfectly neutral. "I'll go get him." I walked into the garage. My dad was under a lift, his face smeared with a bit of carbon, a wrench in his hand. "Dad," I whispered, leaning in. "You won't believe who's in the front office." He wiped his hands on a rag and looked at me. "Who?" "The sponsor, Mrs. Gable." My dad froze for a split second. A slow, knowing glint appeared in his eyes. He didn't say a word. He just threw the rag onto the workbench and straightened his overalls. He remembered the sobbing girl in the truck. He remembered the blisters, and he remembered the woman who thought he was a lowly servant. "Well," he said, a small, dangerous smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Let's see what the asset needs today." He walked into the office, the epitome of the humble mechanic. "Can I help you, ma'am?" he asked. She looked him up and down, her eyes full of the same elitist judgment she'd used in the gym. "I had a minor accident. The insurance company sent me here. I need a very thorough estimate. And I'm in a hurry." The trap was set. She just hadn't realized she'd walked into it yet. The office was small, the air conditioned to a crisp chill that fought against the heavy Louisiana humidity creeping in through the bay doors. Mrs. Gable stood there, clutching her designer handbag like a shield against the rust of the shop. She looked at my dad, and I could tell. She had absolutely no idea who he was. To her, he was just a background character in her life, a service provider who existed only to fix her problems. "My car's a Lexus," she said, her voice dripping with that same condescending honey she used when she was berating the drill team. "It's a very sensitive machine. I hope you're actually qualified to handle a vehicle of this caliber." My dad didn't blink. He just pulled a clipboard from the wall, his movements slow and deliberate. "I've seen a few of them, ma'am. Why don't we go take a look at the damage?" We walked out into the bright white heat of the lot. Her car had taken a hit to the front driver's side, a crumpled fender and a cracked headlight. It was a standard insurance job, the kind my dad could do in his sleep. "It was a nightmare," she sighed, fanning herself with a manicured hand. "A total lack of respect for the rules of the road. People today just have no discipline, no standards." The irony was so thick I could almost taste it. This was the woman who had punished me for my dad being late while letting a smoker stay on the team. Standards. She didn't know the meaning of the word. My dad knelt down, inspecting the bumper. "Chio, looks like you caught the corner of a pole, or maybe a high curb." "It was a delivery truck," she snapped, her eyes shifting for a split second. "And while you're writing up the estimate, I noticed a few other things. There's a ding on the rear bumper and a scratch on the trunk. I'm sure those were caused by the impact." My dad straightened up, his face an unreadable mask. The damage on the back of the car was old, weathered, rusted at the edges, and clearly not from a front-end collision. She was asking him to lie to the insurance company so she could get her whole car detailed on their dime. "That's a lot of damage for one hit," my dad said quietly. "Well, it was a very violent hit," she countered, her voice rising in that familiar, huffy tone. "I expect you to include it all. If you don't, I have friends on the city council. I could have your business license revoked for substandard work. Do you understand?" I felt a chill go down my spine. She was doing it again. The threats, the bullying, the standards. My dad just nodded. "I understand perfectly, ma'am. Let me get the cameras focused. Let me get the photos for the adjuster." Mrs. Gable followed my dad around the car like a drill sergeant inspecting a recruit, her high heels crunching aggressively on the gravel. She was pointing at every tiny imperfection on the silver paint. Scratches from grocery carts, sun-faded trim, and that old, deep dent on the rear bumper that had clearly been there for years. "Make sure you get this one," she said, tapping the rear bumper with the toe of her shoe. "And this scratch on the trunk. It was all part of the same incident. The truck, it swerved. It was very chaotic." My dad held the digital camera steady, the shutter clicking with a cold, mechanical precision. "Ma'am, the impact was on the front left. Physics says a front-end collision doesn't usually cause a rusted-over dent on the back right." Mrs. Gable's face went that familiar, ugly shade of blotchy red I remembered from the gym. She stepped into my dad's space, the same way she had done to me when I was 14. "Are you a physicist or a mechanic? I'm telling you, it happened during the accident. Your job is to write what I tell you to write." "My job is to provide an honest estimate to the insurance adjuster," my dad said, his voice dropping into that low, dangerous register. "If I add pre-existing damage to a new claim, that's fraud. For both of us." She let out a sharp, mocking laugh, the same one Courtney used to use. "Fraud? Don't be dramatic. It's a Lexus. The insurance company expects it to be perfect. And frankly, I expect you to remember your place. You're a man who fixes cars. I'm a woman with influence in this town." She leaned in closer, her floral perfume clashing with the smell of hot asphalt and motor oil. "If you don't include those repairs, I will make sure everyone in my circle knows that Miller's Auto is unreliable. I'll have your license reviewed. I'll make sure you can't get a contract to fix a lawnmower in this parish. Do you understand me now?" My dad didn't flinch. He just looked at her. Really looked at her. The way he'd looked at her in the gravel lot 10 years ago. He saw the same bully, just with more wrinkles and a more expensive car. "I hear you loud and clear, Mrs. Gable," he said. He glanced up at the corner of the shop roof, where a small black dome sat tucked under the eaves. "I've got everything I need." "Good," she huffed, smoothing her skirt. "Have the estimate ready by 5, and don't be late. I hate people who can't keep a schedule." She marched back to the office to sign the drop-off forms, her head held high. She thought she'd won. She thought she'd successfully bullied another liability into doing her bidding. But my dad wasn't looking at the car anymore. He was looking at me. "Honey," he said, a grim smile spreading across his face. "Go into the back office and pull the audio-visual feed from the exterior cam from the moment she stepped out of the car." The back office was a stark contrast to the grease-stained garage. It was cool, quiet, and filled with the soft glow of 4 high-definition monitors. My dad had invested in the best security system money could buy after a break-in a few years back. The cameras didn't just capture blurry shapes. They captured the sweat on a forehead and, more importantly, crystal-clear audio. I sat at the desk, my heart racing, and pulled up the footage from the exterior south lot camera. "There she is," I whispered. On the screen, Mrs. Gable looked like a villain in a silent movie, gesturing wildly at the rear of her car. We watched as she leaned in, her face contorting with that entitled rage. And then, the audio kicked in. "Your job is to write what I tell you to write. I'm a woman with influence. I'll have your license reviewed." It was all there. The solicitation of fraud, the blatant threats to my dad's livelihood, the huffy, arrogant demand for him to break the law just to save her a few $100s on a dent. "Dad, look at this," I said, pointing to the screen. My dad leaned over my shoulder, his arms crossed. He watched the whole thing in silence. He watched her treat him like a lowly servant, the same way she had treated a 14-year-old girl like a liability a decade ago. "She hasn't changed a bit," he murmured. "Still thinks the rules don't apply to her." He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a business card. It was for a man named Bill, an insurance adjuster he had worked with for 20 years. Bill was a straight shooter, the kind of guy who hated scammers more than anything in the world. "Give Bill a call," my dad said. "Tell him I've got a very interesting supplemental file for the Gable claim. Tell him I'm sending over the unreliable estimate she asked for, along with the footage of how she asked for it." "Are you sure, Dad?" I asked. "She's going to be furious." "Honey," he said, and for the first time, I saw the true weight of the justice he'd been waiting for. "She tried to threaten my business. She tried to use me to steal from the insurance company. She's not just a bully anymore, she's a criminal. And in this shop, we follow the standards." I hit the export button. The progress bar crawled across the screen. 10%, 50%, 90%. Done. I attached the video file to the email and hit send. It felt like a weight lifting off my shoulders that I'd been carrying since the 8th grade. The sack of potatoes was finally fighting back, and she was using the very thing the sponsor loved most: a permanent record. The trap didn't just snap shut, it locked. The fallout didn't happen with a scream or a dramatic confrontation in the shop lobby. It happened with a phone call. 2 days after I hit send on that email, the silver Lexus was still sitting in our lot, waiting for the parts to arrive. I was at the front desk when the phone rang. It was Bill, the insurance adjuster. His voice sounded like gravel being crushed in a mortar, dry and completely finished with Mrs. Gable's nonsense. "Hey, kid, put your dad on," he said. "I just finished watching that movie you sent over." I handed the phone to my dad. He leaned against the doorframe, a small, knowing smirk playing on his lips. "Yeah, Bill. You see the part about the city council?" He listened for a moment, nodding. "Is that so? Well, I appreciate you handling it. I don't take kindly to people threatening my license because I won't lie for 'em." When he hung up, he looked at me and winked. "The insurance company isn't just denying the claim for the rear bumper. They're launching a full investigation for attempted insurance fraud. Bill said they have a zero-tolerance policy for solicitation of a fraudulent estimate when there's video evidence of a threat." But the real show started an hour later. Mrs. Gable's luxury SUV screamed into the lot, kicking up a cloud of dust and gravel. She didn't even wait for the engine to stop before she was out of the car, storming toward the office. Her face wasn't just red, it was purple. She looked like she was about to explode. "You!" she shrieked, slamming her hand down on the counter so hard the pens rattled in their cup. "What did you tell them?" My adjuster called me and said my entire policy is being flagged. They're talking about legal action." My dad walked out from the back, wiping his hands on a clean rag. He looked calm, grounded, and completely unimpressed. "I didn't tell them anything they couldn't see for themselves, ma'am," he said coolly. "I just provided the documentation for the claim. Standard procedure." "You ruined everything!" she screamed. "I told you those were from the accident. You've slandered me. I'll sue you for every penny this dump is worth." "Actually," my dad said, pointing a greasy finger toward the black dome in the corner, "you slandered yourself. We have you on camera admitting the front hit was the accident, and then threatening to revoke my license if I didn't add the old damage. That's a felony, Mrs. Gable. It's called insurance fraud." The silence that followed was heavy. The perfect Mrs. Gable, the woman who lived for status and standards, suddenly looked very, very small. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The mechanic she had treated like a servant had just handed the state a rope to hang her with. I can explain, she stammered, her voice suddenly high and thin. Explain it to the adjuster, my dad said, turning his back on her. And get your car off my lot. We don't do business with liabilities here. I watched from the office window as Mrs. Gable scrambled into her Lexus. She didn't look like a who's who anymore. She didn't look like the woman who could command a room with a single snap of her fingers. She looked like a woman who had spent her entire life building a house of cards out of arrogance and elitism, only to have a lowly mechanic blow the whole thing down with a single video file. She peeled out of the lot, her tires spitting gravel against the fence. My dad stood in the doorway, the afternoon sun casting a long shadow across the concrete floor. He didn't look triumphant. He just looked at peace. "You okay, Dad?" I asked, walking over to him. "I'm fine, honey," he said, tucking his hands into the pockets of his overalls. "I just don't like bullies. Never have." He looked at me, and I saw the memory of that 8th grade night flash behind his eyes. He wasn't just defending his business license. He was finishing the job he started 10 years ago in that stadium parking lot. He had protected me then, and he had vindicated me now. In the weeks that followed, the town gossip mill did what it does best. Word got out about the incident at the shop. The insurance company didn't just flag her, they dropped her entirely. I heard through the grapevine that she had to step down from a few of her prestigious committees. Apparently, the city council doesn't want to be associated with someone being investigated for fraud. As for me, that knot in my stomach, the one that had lived there since the first day of drill team tryouts, was finally gone. I realized that people like Mrs. Gable only have power if you believe their version of the world. They want you to think you're a nuisance or a liability, because it makes them feel like assets. But the truth is much simpler. Integrity isn't about having a perfect smile or a fancy car. It's about how you treat people when you think nobody is watching. "Hey," my dad called out as I started to head back to the office. "Why don't we close up early? Let's go get some dinner." My treat. I smiled, looking at the man who had taught me more about standards than any teacher ever could. "Sounds like a plan, Dad." We walked out to his truck, the same old Ford that had carried a sobbing 14-year-old home all those years ago. But this time, the ride was quiet, the air was clear, and for the first time in my life, the past was exactly where it belonged, in the rearview mirror. Don't let people like Mrs. Gable convince you that you aren't worth anything. They are insignificant, and their power is an illusion. If you've ever had a teacher or a boss who tried to crush your spirit, tell me your story in the comments. I read every single one. Subscribe for more stories of bullies getting the ultimate reality check. Remember, you are the asset. See you in the next one.